If you've been keeping up with Fire Emblem Conquest discussion in recent years, you'll know that Mozu, who was once considered to be the worst character in the game, is actually considered to be a unit that can perform pretty solidly throughout the course of a playthrough. So if Mozu does alright on the hardest difficulty of one of the hardest games in the series, she must be amazing in Birthright, right? Birthright is widely considered to be the far easier game, which means it's easier to raise units past their unfortunate starts, and the cast of Birthright is generally considered to be weaker on average than Conquest's. Knowing this, it might surprise you to hear that Birthright is by far Mozu's worst route.
Not strong enough.
Her attributes just don't align with what makes a unit good in Birthright in the same way they do in Conquest. She even has a strong argument for being the worst unit in the game. But you don't just have to take my word for it. Joining me today is Scepti, one of the world's most experienced Fates players, who has recently done a Birthright playthrough focused on using Mozu. So let's go over everything that makes Mozu this bad. Mozu is in what most people consider to be the worst class in the game. Now, she's competing with Kaiden's Kitsune class for this, but Villager is really bad. She starts with E rank in Lances, and Villager can only go up to C rank in Lances, and Villager notably has probably the worst pair of bonuses in the entire game, being 3 skill and 3 luck, which doesn't help you meet any defensive or offensive benchmarks other than slightly increasing your reliability.
Yeah, the pair-up works out to be usually +6 hit. You can get +10 hit from being in attack stance, so there's very little reason to use a +6 hit pair-up, so it's not great.
The big appeal of Villager is the Aptitude skill, which gives plus 10% to all growth rates, which is a pretty substantial nerf from Awakening's Aptitude, which was 20% to all growth rates, although Aptitude does make it so that Mozu technically has the highest growth total in the game.
Yeah, and aside from her really bad HP, her growths do look pretty impressive. Like, 55 defense is solid, and then 60 strength, 70 skill, 75 speed, which is a very impressive offensive growth line.
She does have a bit more room to grow because she starts at level 1 just like Hayato does, but it's going to take her a while to catch up.
Yeah, Fate's EXP is pretty friendly to an underleveled unit, so it's not too bad to catch her up, but like, that's obviously still worse than other units who just never have to catch up in the first place.
Yeah. I have been able to get her to like level 10 after training her in her own paralog and in chapter 9, but it takes a lot of favoritism to get Mozu to the point where your other units already are, especially when she's starting with E rank Lances. I believe she deals 0 damage to Faceless in her starting paralog, right?
Yep, she tanks them unless you apply some sort of boost to her. In any other game, that would be just terrible and she would be written off immediately. But at least this is Fate, so you can change your stats as you see fit. So you can get her to the point where she's damaging, but it does suck that she doesn't start there.
Yeah, you can just trade her like a Strength Tonic or a Brass Naginata +1, or give her pair-ups like Renka, and she can do damage, although she will need basically all of her kills set up for her in her starting chapter, and she also notably gets one-shots by her Faceless in her paralog if she isn't on Woods tiles, which, unfortunate.
Yeah, getting one-shot you can fix with a HP tonic at least, but it's still pretty rough. Especially because it means she needs a tonic to not get one-shot while unpaired up, which she probably wants to be because she's gonna need a dual strike to kill in any reasonable amount of time.
I mean, it's generally not super difficult to tune your damage output so that the Faceless end at 1 HP just because it's so easy to tune your damage in Fates. You can just like make sure that you give the unit that you're sending out into Faceless a Brass Naginata or something that cannot crit, and also has a high hit rate, and you give them tonics or a forge in order to get them to leave the Faceless at 1 health, which is definitely doable, but it's a kind of work that most other units don't need to receive to get raised.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy to get into this cycle of you get a unit who does exactly 1 less than the Faceless have HP, and they bait one, and then Mozu takes it out, and they bait the next one, but it's still pretty clear and blatant favoritism into a unit who doesn't really offer a convincing payoff for that favoritism.
Yeah, And even when you get your primary setup units to get in range of all the Faceless and strip them down to 1 HP, you run into the issue of, if they level up, they might level up their strength, and all of a sudden they're killing the Faceless instead of leaving them at 1. And you're kind of just screwed unless you have a second unit that does perfect damage, so...
Right, at least if you're using like a Rinka pair up there, you can then like switch to a Silas pair up to get a little less damage. But it's still, it's a really unfortunate situation to need to be fed kills and fates, which is a game where you typically one-round enemies pretty often. So having to tune yourself down and sort of sandbag her is a pretty hard sell.
And her base stats really do leave a lot to be desired. Her 4 in defense just will not cut it. Because she is a lance-locked unit, she will be taking on physical enemies that will be able to counter, and she will probably need to be healed after every combat if she doesn't kill them in 1 hit. If she is exposed to any enemies on enemy phase, then you better make sure it's only 1 enemy, or she has full guard gauge, otherwise she's probably gonna die.
Yeah, she is ridiculously frail. 16 HP is abysmal, even by Fleet standards, and 4 defense is just terrible. So that's 21 hit bulk, which is just not good.
And she doesn't even learn the skill that makes her benefit from being underleveled until she reaches level 10. Underdog gives plus 15 hit and plus 15 avoid if a foe's level is higher, and that only comes at level 10, after which point she will probably be not too far below the rest of your units, so...
Yeah, it's just this sort of fundamentally flawed skill, unlike another trainee who has a same activation skill but gets it as a personal. Hers is just so much worse, because like 15 hit would be great during her training phase, because you wouldn't have to worry about her missing and getting one shot on the counter, but once she's level 10, she's been leveling with a 70% skill and 75% luck growth for 9 levels. Her hit rates are fine now. She doesn't need it. And then it doesn't even activate, so it...
Plus she'll be using the Brass Naginata for most of her combat anyways, just because she starts at the terrible E-rank lances, and unless you're like grinding for dual strikes like Zoran does, it'll take a while for her to get to D rank.
Yeah, she needs 20 combats to get to D rank, which is pretty rough when every single one of her combats needs to be carefully calibrated.
And her utility continues to disappoint because her pair-up bonuses also primarily give just skill and luck. C support gives skill, B support gives luck, A support gives a single point of speed, S support gives skill and luck. And she really does not make for a compelling candidate for any unit's pair partner.
Yeah, once you get to S support, she finally gives that 10 hit, so it is now equal to being in attack stance with a generic unit, which is very sad. There is no one who really wants that pair up, especially in Birthright, where a lot of your early game combat is going to be done by ninjas who are using shurikens, which are an accurate weapon type to begin with. So there's like really no good use for that pair up.
Yeah. And you could argue that, oh, I've been playing a lot of Conquest, I reclassed Mozu into Archer, and she has better pair bonuses there. There she actually gives attack and speed, which are really nice. But if you reclass Mozu into Archer in Birthright, you are actively throwing. Mozu is way better in Villager than she is in Archer, just because, at least in Villager, she can see combat on enemy phase, which is where a lot of your Birthright combat is going to be happening. While in Archer, you're limited to only attacking on player phase, pretty much, unless you're going up against a stationary enemy, or you're at the very edge of a unit's range, and they attack you.
Yeah, Archer Mozu in Birthright is just terrible. You have less heart seals to begin with, and it's actively making her worse. She becomes substantially harder to train. She switches to a worse and even less accurate weapon type, because she's stuck using Yumis instead of bows, which just becomes a huge pain for her. And while I do think there is some value to the bows eventually late game, not in early game. Do not reclass her to Archer. It's just not a good idea.
Yeah. If you've been playing a lot of Conquest and you do the Chapter 10 Mozu with the Bronze Bow +1, the Pegasus Knights in Conquest Chapter 10 are notably a lot weaker. than a lot of the other units that you face in Conquest. There is not really an equivalent chapter in Birthright. The two that actually look like they would be good for her are the boat map of flyers and the ninja map, and if you actually look at the ninja map, well, they're just going to be debuffing Mozu and attacking at one range if they can, and well, the ninjas actually have pretty high thresholds to get to one round.
It's not great, and if you did want to poach flyer kills from Mozu, there is the boat map full of flyers. There's actually a much better way to do it than reclassing her to Archer, because Takumi with a Rinka pair up, a Strength Tonic, and a Strength Meal will one-shot the Wyverns and Pegasi twice over, which is substantially pointless overkill. But it is enough that his dual strike alone can kill them. And then you can feed Mozu that way.
Wasting your one and only early game Heart Seal to get Mozu into Archer is just not the play, in Birthright at least.
Yeah, if you want to feed her kills, there's substantially better ways to do it, and long term it makes her worse, because Sniper and Kinshi are not good options for her late game in Birthright.
And Lances are notably a very big boon for Mozu in Villager because Birthright gives effective weapons. If you really want to train a Mozu, your best opportunities are probably going to be chapters 14 and 15. 14 is the map with the triangles of Cavaliers and Paladins, while chapter 15 is the Wolfskin map. Chapter 14 allows Mozu to use the Sword Catcher, which is available in the tier 2 shops, to easily gobble up all of the sword-locked enemies on the left side of the map, and she should pretty easily be able to one-round those enemies with any sort of investment. She will need a bit of help boosting her bulk, but this is Birthright. It's not going to be the most difficult thing, especially when you have things like Sakura's Aura or Rinka pair-up.
Yeah.
And the Wolfskin map is a similar story. You have the Beast Killer.
Yeah, once you get her to D and C rank lances, the C rank lance cap is unfortunate, but it is enough. She can start just sort of poking enemies and killing them with the effective weapons, even while very underleveled. So if you want to get her caught up, you really don't need to care too much in the early game. You're mostly just honestly concerned with skill procs for accuracy, because the hardest part is she just has to hit them, because, you know, if she misses, she's probably gonna die.
And if you're more familiar with the older games in the series, you'll be surprised to hear that basically all of the effective weapons fates are D rank, so she only needs to see 20 combats before chapter 14, before she starts being able to use the Sword Catcher and Beast Killer to get these easy one rounds.
Yeah, and so it makes her training arc a lot easier than most trainees in Fire Emblem, which in theory would paint a really good light for her, like, oh, she's super easy to train. The issue with Mozu in Birthright isn't really anything to do with her training arc even. She just, she has no payoff.
Because there are a fair number of units that start significantly better than her, that also have lances, that also want the experience from chapters 14 and 15 to get the easy coast to level 20 and a promotion, and dedicating that experience to Mozu is probably not even close to your best option for giving those horse and wolfskin kills to. Now, we'll get to the unit that I recommend training over Mozu later, but first, what do you think about Mozu's skills? Aptitude is generally a skill that you'll never complain about having, but starting with Mozu's bases, I don't think Aptitude is really enough to set her too far apart from your other units.
Yeah, it gives her these very good growth rates that allow her to eventually catch up, and so it gets her eventually to the point where she's like on par, but it never actually gets her that far ahead, partially because of Birthright's EXP curve never really letting you get like, you see like 19 and 20 units in Conquest a lot. Those don't happen as often in DR. So Mozu never really gets to a point where she's ahead of everyone, so all Aptitude does is offset some of her downsides. It's not really an upside.
And the problem with low bases and high growth rates is that you will very rarely be able to go significantly above your averages, while if you just have coin flip growths, then hey, there's always a chance that you gain 2 or 3 or 4 levels in a row. That's, with Mozu, that's just expected, and that leaves her unable to really shoot past what you expect her to be.
Yeah, the only stats she can really, like, turn out super impressive like that are her bulk stats, which admittedly are the best stats for her to be blessed in, but it's still not a great look. Like, she's always going to be fast, but there's plenty of people who are always going to be fast, so it's not great.
And Underdog is not an active liability, of course, if you have it and you happen to be underleveled. It's nice. She's probably going to be underleveled for chapters 14 and 15 if you're bringing her into them. And she does appreciate the extra void to make her bulk less of an issue, but the boost to it isn't high enough that it's really something that you really care about. It does help in saving like staff uses, but that's probably not your biggest concern.
Yeah, the bigger deal is definitely just the 15 hit. There's a lot of terrain in the Wolfskin maps, so getting plus 15 hit to like help her hit these killers on there, it's nice. It's somehow one of the better skills in her skill list, which is a very, very sad sight. That's one of her best skills.
Yeah, and her personal skill is Forger. It allows her to heal 20% of her max HP if she starts in a mountain, woods, waste, or field space. And not the most useful personal skill.
Yeah, in the Wolfskin map, it's just renewal. In every other map, it does nothing. A lot of the BR maps, especially the ones that people care about, are indoors. So there's just no terrain tiles at all for her to use. It's not a good skill. It doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, there are forts in a few of the late game Birthright maps, but those aren't on the list of terrains that she benefits from, so she's just kind of sad.
Yeah, it's not great for her. It doesn't really do much. It's technically not a complete nothing personal skill, but it's pretty close.
And if she promotes out of Villager, she has two options. She can either go into Merchant, or she can go into Master of Arms. Merchant is actually pretty nice for her because it gives her one of the more interesting skills in the game, which is Profiteer, which is a luck % chance to gain a gold bar every turn in the first 7 turns, which can allow her to produce money, although the amount of investment that you put into Mozu to get to the point where she's promoted level 5 in Merchant, kind of questionable.
Yeah, it'll take her a while to even earn back the instant gold that you spent on a Master Seal for her. She does eventually get to a pretty high luck stat, which gets you to respectable proc rates with it. And I do think Merchant is one of her better ending classes to begin with anyways, because it's a very bulky class, and it lets her keep her lance rank that she's been building up this whole time. And while it doesn't give her 1-2 range, it does give her that 1-2 range, which isn't as good, but it's the next best thing.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because there are no good 1-2 range lances or bows. She technically has access to the Bolt Naginata on top of her 15 effective % magic growth, so she's probably not going to want to use that. And a lot of enemies in late game Birthrights are like Bow Knights and Dark Knights and Malignites that have the option of attacking her at 2 range or at 1 range, and, well, it's going to take her a while to get rid of those enemy clumps if she's sent out there alone.
Yeah, so there are some tricks you can do with that. For example, in the late game map with Iago, that has that cube of Great Knights and Bow Knights in the corner that just keeps spawning.
Yep.
If you position her in such a way that 2 of the Great Knights can reach her, because Fate's enemies have a tendency to attack in order of highest attack, well, not highest attack to lowest attack, higher damage enemies tend to move first. You can get the Great Knights to attack her with a bow equipped. She'll fail to counterattack them. That will block off the legal melee attacking squares, at which point she can use a bow to enemy phase the Bow Knights. And then once all the Bow Knights are dead, next turn you switch to a Beast Killer or a Sword Catcher and clear out Great Knights and Heroes, which is cool and it's very cute, and it's fun little things like that she can do, but you could have also just used a Mechanist with the Sting Shuriken.
Yep. Bows generally aren't great in Birthrights. The number of maps where you would prefer a bow over, say, a tome or a shuriken, which many of your other units have pretty easy access to, not very high.
Yeah, the one advantage is that Yumis do have pretty tremendous might, so combined with Mozu's speed, she can hit some pretty huge 1-round KO thresholds that are tougher for other units. But the issue is that she isn't doing this in 1 turn anyways, because she needs to do weird positioning stuff. So the actual advantage of one round and KOing gets completely negated.
And Villager also gives access to Spendthrift, another one of the disappointing skills that Mozu gets. It seems good on paper. It is a plus 10 damage dealt, minus 10 damage taken if you spend a gold bar, but it's only on player phase, and she will probably be able to one round the fodder anyways, and it's not like Mozu is going to be your best candidate as a boss killer, as a merchant, because, well, you've got plenty of other units that are perfectly capable of killing Birthright bosses.
Yeah, and the lack of a crescent bow in Birthright really causes that skill to lose a ton of its value. Because in Conquest and Rev, its value comes from the fact that you can stack it with the crescent bow, punch through a bunch of the dragon skin enemies, but you just don't get that option in Right. So she's worse than using like Rod plus Snake Spirit on those bosses.
And her other option for promotion out of Villager is Master of Arms, which gives her swords, lances, and axes. And to be honest, she's probably just going to be sticking with lances just because that's what she has her weapon rank in. And there are a lot of enemies in late game Birthright that are equipped with all three of swords, lances, and axes. I think particularly the Great Knights in Iago's chapter have that. So
yeah,
she doesn't really have control over the weapon triangle on enemy phase anyways.
Yeah, it's this weird case where a lot of Birthright enemies are, like you said, either all three, or they're just swords or just axes. And in all three of those cases, lances are the best option anyways, because if they're just axes, you can use the dual naginata. If they're just swords, you can use your lance. And if they're all three, well, you might as well just use your best weapon rank.
So having access to all three generally doesn't really matter for most units going into Master of Arms, so it's just another physical melee attacking class, and that's not really something that Birthright is really good at giving opportunity to let shine.
Yeah.
It does give her access to Seal Strength, I guess, which she's not going to be clearing out those entire clusters of enemies in one turn, so having the extra effective bulk boost by Seal Strength doesn't hurt.
Yeah,
but
she's probably is the unit at which Seal Strength is like doing the most for them, because her bulk isn't that impressive. Yeah. And if she's doing enemy phase stuff in Merchant or Master of Arms, it's not happening over one turn. So she actually gets to benefit from Seal Strength, which is a pretty big rarity. Most of the time when you put Seal Strength on a unit, it's on someone like a trained Hayato who has, 80 defense anyways, and who cares. But for Mozu, it's actually a pretty significant bulk boost. But yeah, Master of Arms isn't doing her any favors elsewhere, especially because it's faster and frailer than Merchant, which is the total opposite of what Mozu wants. She's already, once she's trained, she's incredibly fast, and her bulk is terrible, so she wants the bulky class.
And Master of Arms also gives access to Life and Death, which unfortunately doesn't come with Vantage from the Samurai class. So you probably don't want to use Life and Death on a unit that isn't going to be one-rounding all the enemies anyways, and will be taking hits from them on enemy phase. It's just not great for Mozu.
Yeah, it's an active Nombo with what she wants to be doing. Her offense is honestly on the better side of things once trained, at least in Merchant, not so much in other classes. So she doesn't want the attack boost as much as most people do, and her bulk just remains terrible no matter what. So reducing her bulk even further isn't good. Technically, if she marries Hinata or Ryoma, she can just learn Vantage by level up, but it's not great.
Then you're deploying Hinata or Ryoma as a pair-up for Mozu, at which point, why? Her speed is not the stat that she needs help in, and they would much rather give Vantage to other units that won't be terrible in the late game, and restricting Mozu's options to not have good 1-2 range in the late game is a very questionable use of Hinata or Ryoma marriage.
Yeah.
And it's just not great.
It's not a great use of Vantage. Admittedly, a Heart-Sealed Hinata is probably her best pair-up partner besides Gorin, because Oni Hinata is 6 strength, 6 defense, which is pretty big.
Yes.
So, if you are, committed to Mozu, I could see going for either Hinata or one of the ninjas as her marriage partner. But it's definitely
Yeah.
a waste of a very good backpack and a very good skill that you could be handing to someone else. But, if your goal is just to make
Oh, yeah.
Mozu work, then that's probably not a consideration.
And Archer is her other class, which is amazing in Conquest, but in Birthright is really not. She does get access to Skill +2 and Quick Draw. Quick Draw is notable for being +4 damage on player phase, but it's Birthright, so outside of like Chapter 11 and Chapter 10, a lot of your combat is going to be happening on enemy phase, and an Archer is just not going to be doing that very well.
Yeah, and also if you're an archer in Birthright with Mozu's speed and the high might of Yumi's,
Yeah.
the enemies are dying anyways if you get to attack them on player phase.
Yep.
So it's not like Quick Draw actually does anything for her. So it's just really not good here.
And if she goes into Sniper, certain blow doesn't actively hurt. You're not going to complain about having +40 hit on player phase, but it does nothing on enemy phase, and she's going to continue to be bow locked with no access to a one-range bow option. So it's just not great if she goes into Sniper. Like, she will eventually get bow fair, but she's not particularly hurting for damage in the first place, especially because by the point that you get bow fair, you will already have Quick Draw. So she will be killing anything that she wants with bows, but
Yeah,
that doesn't make her do anything that she wasn't already going to be able to be doing.
right. By the time Mozu is a level 5 sniper, she averages, with skill +2 factored in, almost 30 skill with the sniper hit boost.
Yeah.
So it's like, by the time she gets certain blow and bow fair, she has outgrown her need for them. So they don't really do anything for her, which makes them just not great.
And Birthright is a game that's not super friendly to Kinchi Knights. There are going to be a lot of bow knights in late game, and there's also going to be a lot of enemies that just charge at her with physical weapons, which Kinchi Knight is not a very bulky class, so she'll kind of just die if she's exposed to enough of them. So having the extra 8 move to actually do something on player phase will just end up, more often than not, getting Mozu in range of more enemies than she can comfortably take on, and she'll end up just dying unless she is super supported. It's just not great.
Yeah, in the hard stats, so HP, strength, defense, Kinchi is actually worse than Villager. We're tied in all 3 categories.
Yeah.
It is statistically not a good class, and the flight doesn't really do much for you in Birthright, and then the weapon choices are the same as Merchant, which does have incredible bases. So it's not a good fit for her. Unlike in Rev and Conquest, where it's probably her best class because those routes just reward flight so much, Birthright is not the same.
Yeah. The difference is, in Conquest and Hinoka's map, Hinoka's flyers spawn 3 at a time, while in Birthright, in Iago's map, chapter 25, the Great Knights and Bow Knights and Dark Knights spawn in groups of 6, so unless you have 6 Kinchi Knights ready to pick them all off, then she's not going to do very well against them.
Yeah, in Conquest you can have this game plan of Kinchi spam, as Zoran calls it, where you just get a bunch of flying player phase delete buttons and you can just pile drive them into the enemies and take them out before they move. It just doesn't work in Birthright. You just can't. So that game plan at which she excels just doesn't work.
And being a shared route unit, Mozu has the tragic friendship situation she has in Birthright, where she only has one friend, which is Oboro, who gives her Spearfighter. Spearfighter, I guess, isn't the worst class. It does have fine bases, but she'd really rather just go into Merchant. It gives her access to Seal Defense, which she probably doesn't really need because her damage is not really the shortcoming that needs fixing. It gives her Swap, which I guess is a utility option, but you already have Oboro and you probably don't need more than one swap user.
Yeah, it's not really doing anything for her. Lancefair is, like, she is going to be using lances for a lot of her combat if she stays in her native class lines.
Yeah.
So that's something, but like you said, damage just isn't her issue. She would really rather a bulk boosting skill from it. And Obro just doesn't provide anything like that.
And again, Rend Heaven boosts her damage output, which she, again, doesn't need. Quixotic boosts her hit, which she doesn't need that much of, and reduces her avoid, which Mozu is a unit that has a lot of speed, so she will have a lot of avoid, which will increase her chance of survival most times. And Quixotic reducing your avoid by 30% in Birthrights, probably not great.
Yeah, she is definitely a unit who would go from having 100 hit and facing like 50 to 60 hit against her to just both sides having 100 hit, which is not what you want.
Yeah.
So Quixotic is probably just an active downside on her and is not worth getting.
Yeah. And Spearmaster is, again, lance locked, and you really don't want to be locked to lances in late game Birthright. Just not having the option to have a good 2-range attack that's not like... What even is the name of the Birthright 2-range locked lance? I've never used it, so I don't even know what it's called.
Well, the enemy only ones are Nagiiris, but there is no player one, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because Birthright doesn't have...
no equivalent to the Wakazashi?
Is there no... The spear equivalent, you mean?
Yeah.
Do they even have one? I don't think they do.
I don't know. I've never found a situation where I've wanted to ever use one.
Yeah, because it's the Norians don't have ranged swords and the Hoshidans don't have ranged lances, except for the magic ones, which invert that. So, I don't believe Hoshido has any ranged lances for the player except Old Nagasata. And, of course, the one javelin.
Damn, so Fear Fighter is even worse for Mozu than I thought. Man, this is just so sad.
Admittedly, if you were going to be one range locked, Spearmaster is probably the best class to do it in. Because it does have a small niche of it. There are a lot of Berserkers in Birthright, and it absolutely hoses enemy Berserkers. They lose their S-rank bonuses, you get a passive dodge boost to negate their crit boost, and you get the dual Naginata against their axes. So it's like, if you were gonna be locked to a melee weapon type, it's the right one to be locked to, but don't be locked to a melee weapon type. That's a bad plan.
Yeah, and she also has access to Basara, and Basara gives her tomes which make use of her non-existent magic stats, so she's effectively still just lance-locked, so why not just go Spearmaster?
Yeah, realistically, all of these options are still just worse than Merchant for her, which is really unfortunate because she's absolutely looking for a class that's better and it just doesn't exist in her at least easy to access class sets.
And like, Oboro Friendship is also just more of a theoretical realm thing because getting Mozu to get to A+ with Oboro is going to take a while, and justifying giving a Mozu pair-up to Oboro or an Oboro pair-up to Mozu is just a very questionable use of your resources.
Yeah, especially when Oboro is basically just Mozu but better. They have essentially the same starting class of lance-locked infantry, and they have the same sort of notable issue of hard to get 1-2 range on, but Oboro has stats.
Yeah, and Oboro isn't locked to staying in one range from her base class set because she has Apothecary, which leads into Mechanist, so Oboro is just a better target for long-term investment.
Yeah, if Mozu could get Apothecary instead of Spear Fighter, she'd be feeling good about it, but she doesn't.
Oh yeah.
Which is equally hilarious of that she gives Apothecary to Takumi if married, which is just bitter irony.
Yeah, and the other painful thing about Mozu is that she does not have any fast supports, so effectively, when you're doing a full recruitment Birthright playthrough, you're just stapling her to an early promoted unit and deploying them for as long as it takes to get them married and ditching Mozu immediately if you're not planning on making Mozu one of your carries. Because it's really hard to justify giving Mozu pair up to any unit if you're not just rushing marriage.
Yeah, unlike in Conquest, there is nothing notable that Mozu can do that isn't just her existing and being a warm body. Like, sure, she can, do those dual strikes in the fire map with Takumi, but that's just her existing. The requirements to do that are just be a deployable unit. She isn't really doing anything that's notable.
So, from that point of view, I think Mozu's two better marriage options are Tsubaki, who you are going to be early promoting to get an early rally speed, and Kaze, who will be early promoting to probably Mechanist to be an early game utility unit and seeing some debuff and ship down combat for supporting earlier units because he isn't going to be great late game.
Yeah, Kaze does give you the advantage of it gets her into her, in theory, best combat class for late game if you really did want to use her.
Yeah.
But in practice, it feels more like you're putting up with her to get them married rather than doing anything with her because, like we said before, her pair-up bonus just isn't helpful to them. In fact, both of those units, Kaze and Tsubaki, are hyper-accurate to begin with. So it's like, you're just kind of putting up with her. But yeah, might as well put it on someone who you early promoted, and so they've got good enough stats to make do without a strong pair-up.
And if you want to have fun with Birthright, honestly, just leaving Mozu and Kaze as your final pairing and letting Kaze die off without caring about raising it as support and letting Midori die with him, yeah, that's probably just fine.
Yeah, if you really do care about full recruitment, but you still don't want to do Kaze, it is at least a nice pairing because you get a Midori with a ridiculous luck stat. So that'll give you a lot more gold than Mozu ever will.
Yes. And it also requires a lot less work to get Midori into Merchant at level 5 because she doesn't start with Mozu's bases. You don't even have to train Mozu in order to get a Midori that can get into Merchant pretty fast. Just leave Mozu at level 1 in Kaze's backpack, and yeah, he'll do fine.
Yeah, and then by the time he falls off, they're already married and you ditch them both. But that is kind of a sad way to look at it, because while she obviously doesn't have any efficient value, she still can do stuff if you want to. And in that regard, Kaze is giving her Mechanist, which is her only access to 1-2 range. Oh, I guess technically she could marry Jacob for it, but it's functionally her only access to 1-2 range.
And she doesn't do the worst with Maid, because her speed is fine, but the logistics of actually getting Mozu to marry Jacob are really not the best, because Jacob is generally going to be a support unit. Mozu's not going to want to see combat very often with Jacob as her backpack, so it's not a great situation.
Yeah, and if the goal is like putting favoritism into Mozu because you just like her because she's cool and you want to make her good, you definitely go for Kaze or Hinata as her partner instead, because those would be a better payoff.
Now, Ninja, of course, isn't really useful for the skills. Eventually she will get Replicate, and she's probably not a bad user of it just because by the time you get Replicate, her stats will be pretty good, like very slightly above your other good units, so she'll be able to survive more combats, and so she'll maybe be fine being sent out into enemies in 2 different parts of a map. But you're not really going into ninjas for skills, it's more for access to daggers, which are the best physical weapon in the game.
Yeah, and she does get to a pretty impressive defense stat eventually. 50% defense growth is... It's above average, it's pretty notable. But even then, her HP never really gets good.
Yeah.
So it's still a little worrying, and like, technically she ends up reaching the defense that like Saizo or Silas would have eventually, but she still has less HP than them, so she's still not as bulky, so it's sad.
So her other big option is going to be Sky Knights, which doesn't really do very much for her. She gets Darting Blow, which she doesn't really need extra help with speed. She gets Camaraderie, which healing is nice, although the amount of healing she'll get generally isn't going to match the amount of damage she'll be taking on any given enemy phase, but it is a supplement to use lower tier healing items if you want to heal Mozu without using one of your staff units too.
Yeah, overall it's not doing much for her. I guess technically it stacks with Forager. Which does work even if she's a Pegasus. But yeah, especially because if you have her in the Pegasus Falco Kinchi line, she is not bulky. So having these sort of self-sustained skills, if it was on someone who did have really good bulk, you could use them as an enemy phase Juggernaut, or you could just leave in a group of enemies, but she doesn't have the bulk to make that work.
And Rally speed, I guess, isn't the worst use for a Mozu. If you like promote her at level 10, get her rally speed, I guess she's fine, but that's just Tsubaki's job. So why spend the time getting her married to Tsubaki and having another rally speed user when you can just have Kyle Dori?
Yeah, you're marrying Mozu to Tsubaki to eventually become a second Tsubaki, which is aspiring to be Tsubaki is a very, very sad fate.
And Warding Blow. Mages aren't super common in late game Birthright. It's fine, her resistance isn't great, so it's functional. It will do a non-zero amount of things if you choose to use Mozu as a level 15 Falcon Knight, but why is Mozu staying in Falcon Knight until level 15?
Obviously for both the Falcon Knight Mozu strats, which sounds terrible.
And again, she gets access to Air Superiority and Amaterasu through Kinshi, which she gets through Archer anyways, and not super notable.
Yeah, there are a lot of units across the Fates routes who can benefit from getting like a dual variant class like that, where you get like both the Archer and Pegasus version of Kinshi. Like in Rev, Hinoka can Funeship Setsuna to pick up Quick Draw super quickly. But it's not helpful here because it gets her darting blows super quickly. Which is like, wow, my unit with a 75% speed growth is even faster in Birthright. How useful.
I guess Cavalier isn't the worst option for Mozu. It gives her access to Elbow Room and Shelter, which if you're doing a semi-early promoted Mozu, can help her damage output, and Shelter is never a bad thing to have on a unit. Just being, again, one range locks as a Paladin or a Great Knight generally isn't great. It ends up just being a different variant of Spearmaster with slightly more move, which is never a bad thing, but it still has the same problems.
It is a bulkier variant of Spearmaster at least, so like, if you were doing like Spearmaster Mozu, then Great Knight would be a pretty substantial upgrade for her. But it's still not great. It's got the same sort of problem as Master of Arms that you listed before, of that like, yes, it has 3 weapon types, but you're just going to use lances anyways.
And Samurai gives her the much-awaited Vantage skill. She is still probably not going to be anywhere close to the best user of Vantage in the game, but it exists. It can let her Vantage Beast Killer, as you mentioned, when she's doing the Merchant strats with your turn 1 bow, turn 2 Beast Killer, but you could be doing so many other things with Samurai Marriage that giving it to Mozu is still not great.
If you wanted to make Mozu like work as a unit and you didn't care about the cost at all, and you wanted her to do something that's a little more uniquely her, I do think Vantage Seal Strength Merchant would be the way to go. I mean, obviously the generic throw her in Mechanist and stat stack because it's Fates works, but if you want something that's a little more special to her, this is definitely what it is. But yeah, you can do a lot with Vantage that isn't using it as a minor bulk boosting option on a unit who's got a very awkward enemy face.
I guess Astra doesn't hurt her because she will be using weapons that are capable of activating skills, and her skill stat is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bulk booster.
She really doesn't want to get into the magic classes just because her magic growth really just isn't there. So she probably does not want to equip tomes ever, really. Yeah. So Diviner and Shrine Maiden, like, if you're using Mozu as a support unit with like Rally Luck and Rally Magic, why are you choosing Mozu for that?
Yeah, she's just clearly more work to get to any of those points, so it's not a great sell. Like, if you did want Magic Mozu for some reason, you'd probably want Oni Chieftain, but she doesn't even get that. So even if you wanted to do Magic Mozu, she's still letting you down.
So yeah, Mozu's situation in Birthright just really isn't great. Like, of course she can be fine if she marries for Ninja. Most units are fine if they marry for Ninja, but she really doesn't have anything that makes her stand out that isn't just worse than being one of your many, many ninjas at the end of Birthright.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because, like, they had an opportunity to make a very good trainee if she just had a payoff, and she doesn't.
Before we move on, there is another thing that we haven't mentioned yet, and that is the big appeal of using Mozu as a mother, which is that she has the capability of passing down the aptitude skill to her children. Now, a lot of people don't really understand how aptitude works when it comes to giving it to children. When children are produced, they start with calculating stats, and then once they're generated, then the skills from their parents get passed on to them. This has the consequence of calculating their base stats without the influence of aptitude. So if they're auto-leveling from their base at level 10 to, let's say, level 18 because you are recruiting them in the mid-game, those auto-levels from level 10 to level 18 are not going to have aptitude active. Aptitude is only going to be active on the levels for which aptitude is on the unit. So that includes those levels from 18 to 20, or if you recruit a child late enough for them to have a offspring seal, the offspring seal levels will have the influence of aptitude intact.
Yeah, so it doesn't apply nearly as much as I think a lot of people think it does, and because it is only a 10% boost, it's not a huge benefit. The main benefit of Mozu as a mother is that her growth total, even before aptitude, is still quite high, and it's higher than almost every Birthright child, except for Sugi, Mitama, and Selkie, who it's only lower than because they're mixed attackers. So she does have a positive impact on the kid's growth, even if you don't pass down aptitude.
Yeah. The extra boost from aptitude does help a little bit, especially if you're doing like a late child and you're doing the offspring seal pretty late. It can get an extra 2 points in each stat, which is pretty impactful, but not the huge benefit that something like Awakening Aptitude gives, which is 20% growths, while Fates is only 10%. You aren't going to be getting ding 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 on every single stat for every single level.
Yeah, it's not a huge benefit. Genuinely, the more notable part of Mozu's inheritance is just her own free aptitude, like speed and defense. The aptitude inheritance is probably the best thing she'll be passing down normally, but that's mostly just on account of the fact that her other options aren't great. Yeah. So +1 or +2 to all stats is the best thing she can give.
Yeah, in Conquest, I know a lot of people like passing down Quick Draw instead of Aptitude just because stacking early damage as soon as possible is very nice in that game. But in Birthright, Quick Draw is a lot less useful just because player phase actions aren't quite as valuable as they are in Conquest. So you'd much rather have something that's active on enemy phase, and hard stats are always going to be active on a unit. So in Birthright, Aptitude is probably going to be a better thing to pass down.
The main appeal of Quick Draw is that it makes the unit easier to train. So even though your levels will be a little worse, you'll probably get some extra EXP that'll make you get more levels in total. That's not even necessarily true in Birthright because the EXP curve is so weird that, like, if you do recruit a child like relatively late, Quick Draw is probably not going to get them a significantly more amount of EXP because the late game Birthright enemies give so little EXP.
But if you really, really, really want to maximize the potential of Aptitude to get the most statted child possible, you probably want to be rushing Mozu Marriage as soon as possible, like putting her in the backpack of a early promoted Tsubaki or Kaze, and making them produce a child as soon as possible, although in Kaze's case, well, you can't get Midori until after chapter 15. So her real best option is just going to be being in the backpack of Tsubaki and producing a Aptitude Kyodori. So you recruit Kyodori as soon as possible and get her out of the oven at like level 14 or something. And from there on, Aptitude will be active and you have that increased chance of leveling up each stat.
You pick up a Aptitude Kyodori. If you wanted to be level 14, that would actually be right around chapter 14. She would have just downright incredible growth rates, and while some of that is aptitude, a lot of it's just Mozu's natural inheritance, and then she'd show up just in time to beast killer some wolf skins and get a bunch of aptitude levels real fast. So that's definitely the best option if you want to like optimize an aptitude child. Unless you're going for just highest total growth rate, in which case Asugi has the highest.
Yes.
I don't think I'd really recommend that.
Although, I should also point out that Aptitude has a bit of negative synergy with Kyodori's personal skill. Prodigy deals +4 damage to foes with strength or magic greater than this unit's strength or magic, whichever is higher. So if Kyodori has a massive strength stat, Prodigy will be active a lot less often.
Yeah, it's technically negative synergy. On the other hand, if she has a massive strength stat, she probably doesn't need Prodigy, so it's not too much of a problem.
Plus, like, Berserkers, which are going to be the enemies that have the really high strength stats. Kyodori will probably still have a bit less strength than those guys, so you'll get the benefit of Prodigy when you really need it.
So that's probably the best option for a Mozu child. And she does do quite well. She has a lot of growth.
So, if you really do want to use Mozu as one of your late game ninjas, Mozu can go into Mechanist and have pretty substantial stats. If you compare her at level 5 promoted to a level 5 promoted Saizo, she actually doesn't compare too poorly. She has less attack by 2. She has 2 more speed, but she has 11 less hits, 2 less avoid, 5 less dodge, 1 less defense, and 1 more resistance. Generally not the most favorable comparison, and her growths aren't even that much better than Saizo's, so outside of speed, which her lead definitely does exist in, it allows her to do stuff like use a steel shuriken eventually, which you can eventually forge, but
yeah,
Saizo just looks better.
And there are more situations in which you could use like an Oni pair-up instead of a pair-up that gives a little bit of speed, which is something. But overall, yeah, Saizo is clearly winning out here. So even after putting all this effort into Mozu of marrying her to Kaze and training her to 20 and 5, she's still not the best option. But admittedly, this is close enough to Saizo that it will still be an effective enemy phase unit.
Yeah, and I mentioned before that there are other units that just do what Mozu does better. Hey, what other lance-locked female units that you can give ninja marriage to will perform the same as Mozu? And the answer to that is Hinoka. Hinoka is far easier to raise because she starts as a Pegasus Knight, which, well, technically Pegasus Knight and Sky Knight are the same class in Fates. She starts as a Sky Knight, which gives her 7 movement and also has lances at base, while also having way better stats at base, as well as one of the best personal skills in the game, meaning that she will be deployed very often, while you really have to be deploying Mozu just for self-improvement most of the time.
Yeah.
It's just really not a great situation.
Hinoka also just starts with the Sea Lances to begin with. So all of the effective weapon lances that you want to use, instead of needing to wait 20 combats, she just has them right away.
Yeah, it's just really sad that Mozu has to exist in the same game as Hinoka, because if you compare them both at level 20 promoted to level 5, Mozu has the same effective attack in Mechanist, she will have the same speed, Mozu will have 1 more hit, they will have the same avoid, they will have the same dodge, and Hinoka will just have better bulk, having 1 more defense and 7 more resistance, while also having the better personal skill in Rallying Cry, which will be useful way more often than Mozu's Forager.
Yeah, and Hinoka also has an HP lead here. So she is...
Yes.
Aside from 1 hit, she is just better in every way, which is really sad. I guess technically Mozu has better growth, but not by much.
Again, the 10% boost from Aptitude only really equates to 1 extra stats after 10 levels, and by the time you get to that point, well, the game's already pretty much over, so Hinoka's just better.
Yeah, it took Hinoka 12 less levels and no weapon rank grinding to get to a point at which she is just better than a unit that took way more. Which is why I'm not hugely positive on the Mechanist Mozu stuff, because, like, okay, technically it's the best thing she could be doing if you wanted to go all in on her, but it's distinctly not unique to her, and she is just worse at it.
So, getting Mozu to the point where she's promoting at a high level is also not going to be a given, because there are a lot of units that have lances that want to feed off the Chapter 14 horses and the Chapter 15 wolfskin. She's competing with Oboro, Silas, Hinoka, and maybe like Great Master Ozama for that experience, and you're only really going to get 2 of them to promote at level 20 from feeding off those maps, and Mozu is really not going to be on the high end of that list when it comes to who's actually worth investing in. So, just...
yeah.
My recommendation in Birthright, if you want to have a fun time, is to just not use Mozu, and you'll have units that actually do things.
Yeah, Mozu is just one of the few units in Fire Emblem who I can see no efficient use for. Like, if you just want to clear the game efficiently, I cannot think of a single way in which Mozu would actually make a contribution that isn't more effort than it's worth, which is very sad. Admittedly, her potential contributions can get quite good. Like, you know, comparable stats to Hinoka and Saizo it's something. Those are both very good units. And, you know, she can eventually be doing Profiteer stuff. She's not completely useless. She has potential contributions, but none of them are ideal.
And if you really do want to raise a 0 to hero trainee unit that starts at level 1, Birthright already gives you Hayato, who just ends up so much better, being one of the better candidates for a carry in late game Birthright, while Mozu just does something that your other carries are going to be doing slightly better than her.
So he's in slightly less of a hole.
Hayato also has access to Mozu's paralog for the training. At that point, just train Hayato in that map instead of Mozu. Like, you can train them both, but it's more work than it's really worth, because Mozu's payoff just isn't there. Well, Hayato's payoff is definitely there.
Yeah, I guess the appeal of Mozu is if you are looking for that 0 to hero and you want the unit in the deepest hole possible, it's Mozu.
Yep.
But yeah, she is definitely the weaker of the 2 sort of trainees of this game. She offers pretty much nothing unique. It's very sad. Though I don't want to be too much doom and gloom about her, because there are a surprising number of places in Birthright where you can make one range work. And I think if you want to use Mozu without it being too miserable, that's probably what you're going to have to try and do. Because you can see here, she is not a good Mechanist. She's just going to be worse than the other options. So don't waste Mechanist on her. If you want to use her, just train her in Villager, promote her to Merchant. I think a lot of people miss the specifics of which maps you can actually, like, do good one-range combat on. Because we've already mentioned 14 and 15. You can do effective damage stuff. But it doesn't just stop there. Immediately after you get to the Pleasure Palace, which has... Well, a lot of the enemies going forward are ranged. The reinforcements who come from behind, I believe there's like 1 javelin and 1 hand axe, and the rest are melee, until you get to the Dark Mages, which are Dark Mages, and Dark Mages can just be one-shot with javelins. They're fake enemies. So, while she's not the one running ahead and doing great things there, she can be someone who you leave behind to clean up reinforcements, which is still a contributing job because, you know, it's Birthright. Gotta route the maps.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of where else. Obviously, all of the maps that have a bunch of faceless, those are all one-range locked. And so if you just have tremendous stats in a lance, I mean, you could just be Oboro and have tremendous stats in a lance, but, you know, Mozu can technically get to that point. Then the other good place is the Hans map, which the left side is... I believe there's 1 Sork on the left side, if I'm remembering correctly, and the rest is all Berserkers and Great Knights.
Yeah.
So, like, maps exist where you can make a one-range locked unit work if you want to. But at the end of the day, Mozu isn't even the best one-range locked unit.
Yeah.
But, like, if you really like Mozu and you want to make Mozu work, you don't have to give up on her. She can definitely be made functional, because at the end of the day, this is still Fate. So stats are a suggestion. You can change them to be whatever you want, and then just find a group where 1-2 range, not as in daggers, but as in lances and bows, can work, and she can do something. It's not flashy, but it's something.
And it's really sad, because in Conquest, she is not even in the bottom tier. She's actually considered to be okay. But Birthright just does not give an environment for Archer to shine, so Mozu is just another Lancelot unit, and it's not great.
It depends on who you ask for Conquest, but a lot of Conquest players will tell you that Mozu's, yeah, she's fine. Because in Conquest, being 2-range locked isn't meaningfully worse than having 1-2 range, because there are so many overlapping enemies that are standing at diagonals to each other that you can enemy phase them. Meanwhile, in Birthright, they are just in cubes, and so you can't get those overlapping ranges.
So Birthright is by far her worst route. She doesn't provide any real utility that other units won't be able to, other than like Profiteer, which just get a Midori.
Yeah, it's by far her worst route. In Conquest, she has good 2-range combat. In Rev, she is a potential flyer, and Flight is very, very good in Rev, where it's not good here. So all of her potential niches from the other routes just evaporate, and she's left with a trainee who doesn't even have that.
Alright. I think we're done here. There is nothing else you want to say? Is there anything you want to plug at the end of this video?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just plug my channel again. I'm Scepti on YouTube. I upload silly stuff occasionally, so check me out and subscribe if you're interested.